This is Apotheosis, the official podcast of the Production Designers Collective. I'm your host, Alexander Whittenberg. Today we're joined by production designer Beth Mickle, whose credits include Drive, Guardians of the Galaxy Vol.3, and Superman. The conversation you're about to hear was recorded in the virtual studio in June of this year. We spoke about the scrappiness of starting out on student films, reimagining the Fortress of Solitude, and some of the amazing steps she's taken towards creating a future in the industry that celebrates equity, diversity, and work-life balance. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Beth Mickle. I want to start with the question that I start every one of these conversations with, which is, what does creativity mean to you?
I love that question. I had this great mentor when I first started. His name was George Allison. He still works now. He was a designer for the ABC News shows, and I was lucky enough to work with him when I was like 21, 22, 23. We did like Good Morning America and Peter Jennings and
Nice.
2020 and so anyway, he had this great line where he said, "It's important to see the world through a child's eyes." And he gave me all these great little anecdotes, great little perils over my few years with him, but that's the one that stayed with me most. And I just remember he would end Fridays by taking us out for, a meal or a drink just to thank myself and the other assistants for, the work we had done during the week. And we'd go see these great things. He'd be like, "Oh, okay, they just opened such and such in Central Park. We're gonna go see it. Oh, they're gonna." And I remember one of the weeks he's like, "They just opened the Columbus Circle Shopping Center. It's two-story or multiple stories, looks on to, Central Park. Let's go, let's all go see it." And I just remember we went up and, we're standing up there, this mezzanine and glass and metal all around you, looking out onto Central Park and the fountain and all this, and just looking at it. And he was just visibly dazzled. You could just see it and just big grin. And that was when he said it. That was, he looked at us and he's like, "It's important to see the world through a child's eyes." He's like, "You have to, see it with wonder, be dazzled by things, and no preconceived notions." And so I've always thought of that as being, to me, that's kind of what creativity means. You can, take those, whatever you see and be inspired by it, whatever you see through those children's eyes and be inspired by it and use that then to create something. But I'm always trying to keep that in mind where, look at things with curiosity and wonder.
No, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that so much. And I really love
Yeah.
the word that you just said that immediately came to mind when you said seeing the world through a child's eyes is curiosity. And I think that's like, one of the most important pieces of the puzzle when you're a production designer or really a
Yeah.
creative of any type is to want to know more about the world, right? And to
Yeah.
constantly be searching and knowing that there's always more to discover, there's always more to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And isn't there a wonderful moment of realization when you realize how little one actually knows? It's kind of like, oh, there's so much more to take in, I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and what a good way of putting it, because you do realize that, Paul Austerberry on that, I guess maybe it was when we were in Greece for the last gathering. Paul Austerberry just said, like, you go and you become an expert in this one little niche
Mm,
thing for the course of a film, whether it's, insects or whether it's, reptilian skin or something like that. You just become an expert in this one little thing, and that's what movies let us do. But you just realize, like, that's just like one little drop in the bucket for all the things that you can become an expert in. And we're so lucky, we get to do that every single show.
absolutely. Yeah.
You're just deep diving into something that normally you'd never be curious about and really trying to seek out information on. And again, doing that with like a child's eyes, like go in, no preconceived notions. Don't try to fit it into a box that you've already decided the size of, and
Yeah.
go in just kind of open minded and with wonder. And yeah.
Yeah. And one
Mhm.
one thing I've always believed is that the designer's job is really a 24/7 kind of thing, because even when you're not specifically working with your team on a particular film or even between films, you're always seeking moments of inspiration no matter where you go,
Yeah.
right?
Completely, completely. And I find it's really fun, whatever show you're on, that really kind of drives what your eye is really tuned to, that year or that moment. And it's yeah, and it's amazing. You can kind of see it anywhere. Thankfully, again, my husband is a production designer as well, Russell. And so he's, we both do it. And so he's fine when we're out on a trip. We got to stop because that like, oh, the support under that bridge is exactly the kind of thing that I was just thinking for this spaceship thing. And like, gotta stop and go back. And can I get photos? And like, so we both kind of operate that way, which is great. And you both it's just kind of like an understanding the household, like no, this is, you're seeing something through, you're following a thread through. um
Yes.
yeah, it's
You have to
really, and it
build
makes
those libraries of mental imagery, right?
completely it makes traveling like, traveling was always fun before I was really deep in production design, but man, has it like made traveling just a whole new world because suddenly everything is inspiration. And Russ had actually designed or art directed a movie in India a long time ago, and I got to go with them, and I just remember just being totally taken by all of these little villages and all these facades and all these villages. And we were there for a couple months, and I spent the whole time going out and finding these little streets and just doing photos of all these facades and tile and signage and the colors. I just couldn't get enough of it. And I came back and I had 500 photos of all these facades. And then literally like 2 years later, I got no, I guess it was a couple years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I got a film called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot,
Mm.
where Tina Fey spends a lot of time in the Middle East, but it's there was a lot of kind of crossover with a lot of the stuff that I had seen in India, and so we were able to kind of synthesize a lot of the photos I had taken, a lot of the research that we had on the Middle East, and all of a sudden 5 years later, all of my travel photos were just big 8 by 10 prints plastering the entire wall of the art department. So,
Oh, I love
yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
amazing. That's amazing that, it's like even just knowing in the moment that you're in these places that it's so valuable to capture that however you can, whether it's through a photograph
Completely.
or a sketch or even journaling,
Yeah.
because you know that at some point it'll come back into play, at some point.
Completely. I have a whole folder of just like floor tile, and it's always like my shoes, and it just shows like, is it like my little pointed toe like ballet flats, or is it my sneakers, or is it like some inappropriately high heeled boot that I was wearing in some place I shouldn't? And like, and I just have them all cataloged, and I can't tell you how many times I go to it. And you're
Yeah,
going through and you're trying to find something for a graphic designer, and you flip through and you're like, okay, just look around my feet, but here like you can see a pattern, and that's the kind of pattern I'm thinking. And
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's really really fun. It's the, again, the joy of what we do, where absolutely everywhere you look there's something kind of wonderful. And
absolutely.
realize how many, I think how often people are probably sleepwalking through a lot of things they're passing by in
Mm,
life. So we're really lucky to be in a profession that really tunes us into our surroundings.
I agree 100%. And I'm
Mm.
really happy you brought up travel, and that's something I definitely want to revisit again a little later in our conversation. But I am curious
Mhm.
about speaking of childhood and your mentor's piece of advice to always see the world through a child's eyes.
Mhm.
Curious about your childhood, and was there like a moment or maybe moments
Ah,
of inspiration that you can recall that might have set you on the path to where you are today?
yeah. I had this wonderful art teacher. Her name's Karen Schreiner. We're still in touch, 30 years later, we're still very much in touch. In fact, her niece Mary is our graphic designer. Mary Schreiner lives in Atlanta as well.
I love that.
And I got her into the film industry after Karen suggested we chat. And so anyway, she always really encouraged me to pursue art. I loved it as a kid. I was always, always, always making things. I was always painting, always drawing. And Miss Schreiner was the one who really just said, you really need to stick with this. You can find somewhere in the world to make a career out of this. And I remember I was going to try to go. My dad was a family doctor, and I was going to try to go for pre-med somewhere, and I would have been miserable, and I also wouldn't have been great at it. I'm not a great test taker. Like I would have not done well. I would have not gotten to the end. And I remember just before I went off to college, I remember she said to me like, I was picking my major, this crazy thing you have to do at 18 years old, trying to figure out your major. And
Yes.
she just, you're right. Like, and she just said, absolutely not. Like, you really should, follow art. You can always fall back on science, but like really follow art. So that was really important. But then I was always making stuff as a little kid. I was obsessed with, like, I would make everything out of construction paper that I could possibly make. Like I would make shoes. I actually just rewatched Wizard of Oz, and I remember making red ruby slippers to like match, the ruby slippers of Wizard of Oz out of construction paper and like clear tape. And
Mm.
I would take cardboard and I'd make like a stacked heel. I like stacked like 30 pieces of cardboard to make like a block heel. And then I'd wrap
Oh
my
my
feet in
gosh.
construction paper, and then I'd tape them around the whole thing, and then I'd sprinkle glitter on them. And um, and then I'd make little villages, and we're making a little Native American village and making little castles all out of construction paper and cardboard. And we had this great childhood table growing up, like a big coffee table, really big, long, round coffee table. And I would set up all these little dioramas on there with all my little things that I would make with my hands. So anyway, that was just always a big part of my childhood. But then the other big part, just as important as Karen, if not more so, my brother Jim Mickle. He's a writer and director. Very proud of him. He did the show Sweet Tooth that was on Netflix.
Very good.
And yeah, I'm incredibly proud of him. He spent
Yeah.
many, many years in the indie world and making these really just terrific, 2 million, 3 million, $5 million movies, and then got this opportunity to do Netflix 5 years ago. And so, yeah, so super proud of him. But he was always really interested in filmmaking when we were growing up. And so when we were 10, 11, we always, our parents got us a little Super 8 camera and we'd make little movies in our backyard. And so that was obviously the other big force pulling me into the film world. So,
I love
and then,
that.
yeah, so I owe so much to him, and and I couldn't be more proud of him. We're as close as any two people can possibly be, and it's been really fun to watch each other's careers grow now over the decades, really.
Have you
So,
all had a chance to go back and revisit any of the original Super 8 footage that you all took as
yes,
children and revisit any of those early films?
yes. In fact, so they just did like a 20-year anniversary of his first little movie that we did when we were, right out of college, and they did a little 20-year anniversary like kind of documentary about the making of, which was really, really, really sweet. And it was this little, like, I want to say it was like $75,000 horror film that we made called Mulberry Street. We actually shot it on Mulberry Street in New York City. All He had a co-writer on this, a great guy, Nick D'Amici was his name, who was also an actor. And Nick had this great old rent stabilized apartment right on Houston Street. So we shot the entire thing in Nick's apartment and then at a bar across the street. Anyway, for that movie, they did this documentary on the making of, and they wanted to go through all my brother's old films. And so
Mhm.
he found this old Tupperware, thank God, this like old, plastic container of all these movies that we made. And he got them all digitized. This was just like 3 months ago. He got them all digitized. And he's just been texting them to me, and we're just like laughing, just watching how absurd. We had a stop motion animation movie where tools came out and like attacked one of our school
I
friends.
love it. I
We
love
had
it so
another
much.
I got him a little pair of gorilla slippers for Christmas one year. And so there was a whole series of Attack of the Killer Gorillas where like the gorillas would like kill our neighbors. And I was the detective with our neighbor trying to solve the crimes. And they're not great, but it's like there's, it was the beginnings of something.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that watching them, the sparks are evident, of learning how to kinda do these little tricks along the way and seeing how
Yeah.
that, in some ways, probably directly translated into your professional career. But I will
Yeah.
say, I think the Metrograph needs to consider a, retrospective of some of these Super 8 films you all have done.
It would be amazing. Like all of our old high school friends, everybody's kids. Like
I
it's
love it.
it's pretty
And
awesome.
it's funny, I have a box in my closet of a bunch of mini DVs that I just haven't had a way of watching them in so many years. And I think, my camera, like I haven't figured out how to hook it back up to my TV to like replay these. And I think this conversation is inspiring me to finally like go get them digitized and watch them because
Yeah, it's
I
worth
think
it. It's
there's great value in looking back at those early moments, right?
completely, because I think, like you said, you can see where like little bits of inspiration were there, little steps in that direction, but also like things that you learned from. Like I love going back and looking at some of the old movies that I did when I really, really first started, and I remember sets that I thought like, oh, I nailed this, and then you go back and you look and you're like, oh God, what was I thinking? But it's great because then you can really see growth.
Yeah,
You can really see like, oh, tastes refined and instincts, sharpened, and talent was built up over these years of working in this industry. And so it
absolutely.
is. It's good to go back and take a look.
Leading into the college years, I know you would often help your brother. Correct me if I'm wrong, he was studying at NYU, right? And you would go and help
Yeah.
kind of art direct and design the films that he was doing in school. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. He was studying film at NYU, and I was studying art history and studio art at Columbia. And honestly, I was just telling the story not long ago to a friend. One of the reasons I chose Columbia was because he and I were just so close, and I just remember wanting to be in the same city as him. And I was so lucky I got in. But that was one of my reasons for applying in the first place, was just to try to be close to him. And so he's 1 year older than I am. So he was working on a sophomore film, and I was a freshman. And he would just, he said, if you want to, can you come down and just help put some sets together? And it was so simple, at that point. It was just like making sure there was a couch, and making sure, a wall needed to be painted, it was painted, and making sure the props were there, and really, really, really simple stuff. So I was doing that, and then some of his friends were making films, and they'd asked me. I kind of became a little bit of like the art girl, even though I didn't go to NYU, but I ended up doing a number of NYU shorts, um, and still though, I still at that point didn't realize that that was a career. Like it just hadn't clicked, and I was still thinking like, okay, I'm gonna go work at the Met, or work in an art gallery, or I'm gonna try to get my paintings into a gallery, and which would have been amazing, but I certainly wouldn't have been of the caliber, talent wise, for that. But also the life would have been so different. I love how communal our film world is, and fine art is not communal in the same way. And that I now as an adult, I realize I really would have missed that. But anyway, at that point, I still thought that's what I was heading toward, and sophomore year and junior year of college, still thought that's what I was heading toward. And it just, even though I was surrounded by film students, it hadn't occurred to me that there were paying jobs outside of like director and producer,
Right,
And
right.
so,
Yeah.
and then I remember my brother, when he was still in college, and he went and storyboarded on a movie called Chase the Dragon. It was like shooting in the South, really tiny little movie. And he was a storyboard artist for, a couple $100 a week kind of thing. And I remember he came home after that, and he was like, Bethy, like, you're never going to believe it. Like, there's a woman there she's called a set decorator, and she is literally employed just to go out to like local thrift stores and stores and like find stuff for the set. Like, and she's getting
Yes.
paid. And I remember being like, really? And he was like, and then there's somebody else who's just painting the set, and that person's getting paid. And it really blew my mind. And that was one of the first conversations I remember my wheels started to turn on, like, oh, okay, maybe there are roles here. And at that point, I think I just hadn't realized that production design was going to be where I wanted to head. I think even at that point, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll just be a painter, and that'll be where I land, and how great that'll be. But I'm really, really glad I was doing all those student films as a production designer, technically, even though I was doing kind of a little bit of everything, but kind of
Yeah.
heading all the visuals. So it really kind of primed me to be able to step into that role, really, really kind of right off the bat. So
Yeah.
lucky. So many things fell into place, and I count my lucky stars all the time for that. So.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
fantastic. And one of the
Mhm.
things that we haven't spoken about before, but actually that we kind of have in common is I attended SUNY Purchase and studied theatrical set
Ah,
design. And I had a friend who we had gone to high school together, and he ended up going to NYU and studying film. but I would come and art direct his student films. And it was the same kind of thing where it was
Oh,
very much a checklist of like making sure all the props and the furniture that was scripted was there.
yeah.
But what
Uh,
really happened a bit into the, after doing a number of these kind of small, really scrappy little short films, there was a moment of realization that, oh, wait, you start to realize you kind of know what you're doing after time, right? And you're
yeah.
like making choices about colors that are a subtle metaphor, but you don't really realize that you're doing it until you stop and pause and look back. And I'm curious if you had a moment or probably, several times in your career, I'm sure, where you've looked back on those early films and realized, you know what? Actually, you were kind of figuring it out as you went, and you really kind of learned it quickly and realized that this might be a natural fit for you, right?
Yeah, I think it was, and actually, let me take it back to that very first film my brother did, this tiny movie where I just had this image in my head of, okay, this bedroom that we're going to be in has kind of a tense scene, and I just had this really vivid green in my head of what needed to surround the scene, and it was not a green you'd use. It was like a very not even olivey. It was kind of a true green with a little age on it, and I just had this really vivid memory in my head of like that's what it needs to be, um and then watching the movie, that was before I even had the sense of like, think of the whole movie, think of all these sets and all these scenes playing as one, as a cohesive. And it was even before I had that instinct, that awareness. I just remember watching a movie then, as my brother was cutting it and watching it. And whenever he got to that scene, I just remember being like, oh, damn, I'm so happy with that choice. Like, wow, that was like, I don't
Yes.
know where that came from. It was up here, but wow, that really worked. And then there were a bunch of moments like that, like early on, and even in the short films where, um, yeah, where I just remember thinking, like, wow, an idea, kind of just like a vision popped in my head of what that should be. And as I was reading the script for this short film or this feature, I could visualize what this was. Um, and I think, actually, it took me a couple years in to realize that not everybody is visual, and in fact, a lot of directors aren't visual and can't and don't have the ability to or the interest to visualize,
Hmm.
and to realize like, oh, that is a natural born thing, and of course you can cultivate it. Of course, you can kind of train your mind's eye a bit, but that is definitely like you could be like you're lucky if you're born with it, and I really feel like I
Right.
was born
Right.
with it. And I just remember that was a really realizing like, oh, as I'm reading the script, I'm picturing what everything looks like, and then I'd sit down with one of these student directors, for one of the shorts or some of my early movies, and the directors would be like, I just wrote it, I have no idea, like I don't know what it should be. And I'd be like, oh, what do you picture? I'd be like, oh, okay, that's kind of where my head goes. So I'm definitely, yeah, I and then I think doing enough sets where you start to gain confidence that like what your instincts are and what you're visualizing in your head is there's a good chance it'll work out. And so see it through and stick with those ideas.
Certainly, you reach a point where you started to get a little more money and you learn how to make that dollar really stretch, which I think
Mm.
is
Yeah.
something that's really fantastic about that moment in time,
Yeah.
is learning how to creatively problem solve with, in a very scrappy manner, right? Because you don't have all the
Yeah.
resources you do have on even an independent feature or a small studio film. It's like you are really working with kind of what you have, which could be next to
Yeah.
nothing. So, how do you approach, when you're looking at those projects and how to kind of economize what resources you have? Do you find that it often results in even more creative solutions?
Yeah, I really do. I think it's everybody a lot of folks have said like, "Oh, wow, once you get to those, the big movies, the giant temple movies, then like the sky's the limit and you can do anything." And it's true to an extent, but I also feel like taking off those guardrails of like, "Oh, wow, we need to figure this out within this tiny amount of time and with like literally a little bit of thread and tape and like some paint that's in the back of the car." Like some a lot of magic is made with that kind of thinking and that kind of problem solving. And I that's one of the only things really with doing bigger films that I really mourn the loss of. I think the stuff that comes, the creativity that comes, and the spontaneity that comes with having some of those, not having those resources. That I think it's led to some of the things I've been most happy about in my career. Um, so yeah, so I feel like whenever anybody asks me about getting into this industry and where to start, and a lot of times they'll say like, oh, I really want to, be doing the big movies, and what's the process of getting there? And I just always say, just, start with like, you got to do tiny movies, Imbal Weinberg, from the Production Designers Collective. We both started together, met when we were, late teens, um, uh, and started with kind of co-designing and doing these tiny itty bitty little movies. And I just always think like, we did that for 10 years. Like if there was a movie being shot in New York that was under $250,000 back in the early 2000s, chances are either Imbal or Imbal and I were doing it. It was like we
Yeah,
had the
yeah.
market cornered on like the micro budget movies. And just being able to like, oh yeah, all right, setback budget is $1,000. I could do that. Like, and not even batting an eyelash. And I think it just makes you be so resourceful, and it makes you look at everything differently, and like every trash pile you see, there's some goodies in there, that could be used. And
Yes.
and I just yeah, and I feel like those are skills that you're not going to learn unless your feet are really held to the fire, and you really have to pull off something with no money and and nothing. And then that's where I think all those great skills come from. So anyway, I always tell people like, start with that and be in that for a long time. Don't rush to get out of it. Like, I'm glad I spent as many years in that world as I did. And in fact, I'd even still like, I'd relish the idea to do, $1 million movie, and $5 million movie. I'd relish the idea to do it, just because it'd be fun to go back and really kind of stretch those, flex those muscles again, and stretch that rubber band again. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Don't you think there's that moment as a production designer where you realize that it's just as valuable sometimes to take things away than it is to add?
completely. It's one of those, it's one of those things that, they like, they're not teaching you that, if you're studying design somewhere, like nobody's teaching you that. It's always like, what can you add? What can you build? What can you create? But yeah, it's sometimes it is like, what pieces are cluttering up the space? What pillar is getting in the way of like where some shot could be? And like, is there a way to, reorient things? And I remember I was shooting another tiny movie in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I remember we've had this great barber shop, and we went in, and it was amazing. And my set decorator came in, and he was like, okay, what are we gonna do in here? And I was like, like, let's just sit with it for a bit. And at that point, it was like literally like you'd find it, you basically dress it that day and shoot it the next day. It was that kind of
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
And I remember, we had all these totes brought in, and like, okay, let's see what we want to put. And the more I looked at it, it was like, actually, no, Richie, like, let's just start peeling stuff out. Let's just start peeling stuff out, guys. Let's just declutter it. Like, let's try to see some of the architecture. Let's try to see these mirrors a little bit more. Um, and that was the very first time in my career that I'd done that. And I remember looking at the before and after photos, and being like, oh yeah, no, we spent literally $0 on that set. All we did was just move some stuff out.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it was, I think, a non-union movie, and so it was just Richie and me pulling stuff out, and so anyway, yeah, sometimes it is that, it's what do you need just to kind of declutter a space or to kind of open up a view. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I think it can be a scary thing to have a blank wall sometimes because,
Yeah,
it's uh there is always this reality of looking at the frame, on the monitor and being frightened by emptiness sometimes.
yeah,
But then you go out into the world and you find yourself in wherever, like for instance, the place you just mentioned, and you realize actually maybe not every place is filled with personality and artwork and
yeah,
all these details. It's like sometimes that austerity or the blankness does exist in
yeah.
reality, and it even speaks louder than all the stuff. you know.
Yeah, and maybe there's something in the script that's calling for it. There's something that the character's going through. There's some moment, and Ball actually I think did that really wonderfully in The Room Next Door, the Pedro Almodovar movie
Yeah,
she had done, where there were obviously some sets really, really dressed and filled out, and then others that were really kind of left to just, hey, here's a really bold color and like one piece of furniture, and we're not going to over adorn it, and made for these just really beautiful graphic frames. And we're watching it and being so proud of her and being like, man, like, damn, like good decision after good decision, and just, having a great moment of like, wow, she and I've come a long way in 25 years, you know?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, and I agree that her work on that film is brilliant as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I wanted to
Mhm.
say, as a production designer, you get to be a production designer might be the job title, but within that job title, you also have, to list a few, archaeologist, historian, engineer, sculptor, painter, psychologist, sometimes even a therapist, dare I say. Um, but I'm curious about, like, how all of these kind of different elements come into play. And I want to use an example in the film Drive. Let's take Driver's apartment and let's take Irene's apartment and dissect a bit how you're telling a story of who these characters are through the space they live in. And maybe even if you have any insight to share of what your relationship was like working with the actors in that film on allowing them to maybe help inform some of those decisions as well.
Carey Mulligan in that movie was going to be married to Oscar Isaac, and I remember we thought, okay, we wanted to keep it feminine for her because a lot of the scenes are just her, but also bring in a little bit of color that could be inspired by Oscar Isaac's heritage, and so that kind of led us to some things that were, a little bit, some of the oranges, some of the greens, some of the yellows, and trying to keep it from being too muted of a palette in there. And I remember there was a great scene of like a welcome home for Oscar Isaac's party that they did, and I remember we put up some streamers, and it was really festive. And Tom Siegel's the DP on that. Just did beautiful lighting as he really just always does. And I just remember watching that on the monitor and be like, okay, this has like flavor, and this feels and flair, and this feels right. Um and but then Ryan Gosling, on the other hand, I mean, he and I had worked together at that point and had a good relationship. And um I remember he wanted his to be really, really stark. And I remember I thought, okay, so we're gonna really kind of strip it down, kind of what we were just talking about, make it really, really spare. And he just said he's like he needs to be able to just have a bag and he can just pick it up and go if he needs to get out of Dodge. He doesn't have any personal belongings. And so, so I also thought, okay, in contrast to Irene's, to Carey Mulligan's apartment, we're going to make it really, really muted color. So I picked this really kind of somber, slate blue color. It's one of my favorites on film anyway, but it really kind of seemed to fit his kind of moody character.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
then it was, oh, thank you. I look back at some of the stills from that. I was really, really happy with that. And I remember we decided to put the cutout window looking from the living room into the kitchen. We did that for Irene's apartment. So we thought, okay, let's do that with Ryan's apartment as well. And the one like bit of furniture he really has is like a table where he sits and he's working on a car engine. That was one of his ideas. He's like he's always doing something. He's messing around for something for a car. He's fixing something, and we thought it was kind of like the engine was kind of like the beating heart of his car, and so he's working on it. And I remember we framed it up to be right in front of that window looking into the kitchen, and I was really happy with that frame. I remember it was really like the kind of pale slate blue, then this window framed behind him with blue tile beyond it, really, really graphic. And then he's just sitting there at the table. There's nothing else in either direction except this one little folding table with this one, engine that he's working on. um so a lot of that came from him, but he also had another idea that I remember being like, oh god, I don't know if this is gonna work, where he was like, I think there should be an accent wall of wallpaper. And I was like, okay, like what kind of wallpaper? Because I don't think Driver is putting up wallpaper. He's like, no, that's the thing. Like, you know how you just move into an apartment and there's some wallpaper up left over from the tenant who was before you. And he's like, maybe there's, an old woman that had lived there before me. And so it should be something that really goes against what my character is. And it's some old fashioned wallpaper. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, wow. Like, if he has some, old granny wallpaper, behind his head in the bed, like, people are going to be like, what was that designer thinking? Um, But you know what? Like, it actually worked. Like, we picked a tall wallpaper. He helped pick it. And we did this accent wall behind his bed. And sure enough, you do see it. You could see it. And we aged it down to really try to, at least that was like the best way, to try to sell the fact that this would have been there. It was installed back before he was born, that kind of thing. Um, and it definitely gives a really kind of kooky, like, like moment. If you're really dissecting the apartment and really looking, you'd be like, that's an odd choice. But hopefully my hope was always like, all right, the age is really going to tell the audience that, Ryan Gosling's character didn't put this out. And then I think it actually worked. I think it actually that ended up working. And I remember we actually let him pick his bedspread too. We had the set decorator, Lisa Sessions, she had piled, he wanted to have a big hand on what the bedspread was. And we put 10 different, layered 10 different bedspreads on top of his bed. And he came in and he like peeled through, and found one and like pulled all the others out, put that one on that he liked, and the rest we carted out. Um, so yeah, that was really fun. That was the first movie I ever did where we actually had like a real proper build, like, and it was, we did that long hallway, we did the elevator, we did the two apartment buildings coming off of it, and that was the first show I ever did. We had a proper construction department, a construction coordinator, and it was really exciting. It was just really exciting. That was the first time that I was like, oh, when you're doing everything from scratch, you can decide what every surface is. Like, wow,
Yeah. Well, I imagine it was maybe it felt like perhaps an embarrassment of riches after coming from sets where you were probably an art, well, not immediately before, but a little while before, where you were probably one of a few people kind of doing everything, right?
Yeah,
And
yes.
so, how was that transition to a point where now you have a team of people that are looking to you for guidance and answers? How did you sort of feel
Yeah.
making that jump into that other space?
That's a great question. My brother and I, we both always go back to this. So we both played basketball. We were before there was film in our life, like there was just basketball. It was we played really seriously. We were captains of our basketball teams. We were in it to win it. Like from like little kid on, there was always a basketball in our hands. And played year round. It was, summer camps, the whole thing. And I really think we both always say, like, wow, we had no idea how vital that was in honing our ability to be team players and team leaders, to be both of those things. And I really feel like, wow, I bring those skills right into running or working with a department. And, you know, we I would always kind of describe myself as like a basketball player who was also a cheerleader for our own team. Like every time anybody hit a shot, I was cheering them on. I'm high fiving everybody. Okay, making sure everybody knows, like, they're seen, they're appreciated. Like you just did something for the team. Okay, way to go. High five. And so I very much approached the art department that way. Like everybody, whatever you brought to the table, like we're gonna like thank you for it and applaud you for it and like make sure you know that your contribution meant something. And
Yeah,
and we're all getting there, we're all getting to that finish line together as a team. Like that shot clock is gonna run out, that the fourth quarter is gonna run out, but at the end it's all of us got here together, whatever the score may be at the end of it. So that really helped when it went from just being literally those first handful of years, it was just Imbal and me. And then one year we got a prop master, and that was like, oh my God, we have a prop master, Jeremy Bell, and this is amazing. Um, and then it started to be like, okay, now we have three, four, five people, and we have to kind of give them direction. Uh, and yeah, and I think probably one of the biggest things was just at that same time was starting to have confidence in my choices as a designer. So feeling confident in what I was asking people to execute. And even when you'd see raised eyebrows and things, just say like, no, like, let's just keep pushing ahead. I have a vision for this. I think it's going to work out. And, um, so yeah, so I think that all kind of fell into place right around the same time. I still remember though on Drive, Lisa Sessions, our set decorator, they were going to be dressing Carrie Mulligan's set, and it had to be dressed over a weekend. It was
hmm
still a small movie. It was, I think, 12 million, I think was the budget. And I remember I showed up on the weekend to work with them. I was fully like, all right, I'm here to dress the set. And I just remember they all looked at me because it was like a proper union movie, and they were like, what are you doing? I was like there with like my work clothes, like my like grungy, like,
right.
I'm ready to paint. I'm ready to put stuff together. I'm ready to like, where can I put this painting? And I remember they were all totally mystified. They were all really experienced. Like they had all done like David Fincher's movies and stuff. So they were like, what is she doing? And I was just like, listen, I come from tiny movie making where I dressed every set basically by myself or with like one other person. So it's going to be really hard for me to like not be a part of this. And they were all really, really lovely. I remember Freddie Woff, it was our lead man. He's now a designer, production designer. I remember he had peanut butter and a big loaf of Wonder Bread. He was just like making peanut butter sandwiches and tossing them to people all day long. I ate like 6 peanut butter sandwiches. I like dressed the set. I felt so good. I was like, so yeah. So
That's a
that was,
great story.
yeah, it was so I was still doing that still for a number of years. But then you just, the movies get demanding enough and big enough, and also you realize like, oh wow, there's a whole department that's there to do that, and that's one thing I can let go of. And that's actually one of the things Imbal and I have talked a whole lot about as our careers have grown and as the movies have gotten bigger, and is just making sure you're giving everybody space to do their job too, and to not have people feel like you're stepping on their toes, to not yeah, just to make sure that you're being respectful of everybody else's roles as well. So in retrospect, Lisa,
Absolutely.
I'm sure could have been like, wait a minute, that's kind of my job, and you can come take a look, give notes, but she was just so gracious about it. And anyway, yeah, so it's really important to be able to kind of recognize when it's other people's jobs, you let them do it, take stress off of you. There's like nothing wrong with delegating. So.
Well, from one turning point to another, I'd love for you to paint us a picture of the moment you were working on Motherless Brooklyn and you got a call to come join the MCU with Guardians of the Galaxy Vol.3.
Yes, Jesus. At that point, I mean, I was sure that Marvel was never going to hire me. I'm sure I told this story before, but the at that point I'd only ever done these kind of small studio movies, and I remember interviewing on one or two Marvel things, just got lucky enough to get in the door, just directors I knew, people I knew. And I just remember just being utterly aware of like, they're never going to hire me. Like they just had like the top of the top people in here interviewing for this. Um, and I just remember thinking when I got a call to meet on it, I just remember thinking like, wow, everybody's going to want to do this movie. It's entirely space bound. It's, as sci-fi as it gets. Um, James, I think, is one of the best filmmakers working today. I think he's a legend, and so everybody's going to want to do this movie. So they're going to meet with me. And honestly, at that point, I was like, they're just filling a quota. They just want to say they did meet with women, but oh, sorry, it didn't work. We gave it to this other guy that does all the Marvel movies. I was sure that's the way that was going to go. Um, but when we met, James and I got along. We had a good chat. He was a big fan of Drive. Like that was one of the things that, one of the only things in my body of work that was recognizable at that time. And I remember we had a good chat. We talked for like an hour, and they didn't have a script or anything they could send, so it was really just kind of a chat about, hey, how do you approach work? Hey, how do you like to work?
Yeah,
Hey, how do you make your decisions?
good vibe check.
And yeah, it was kind of a vibe check. Like there was no book to be assembled of what it could be. Even though I tried doing some like, here's some 1980s inspired images, just riffing off of the first two, and he was
Yeah.
even like, great, thanks, but let's just talk about I was like, okay, I'll put this away. Um, and it was a good vibe, and I really enjoyed him. But I literally, when we hung up, I was like, that's the last time I'll ever speak to James Gunn. I was like, that's the end of it. And then and
And
then
then
literally
spoiler alert.
spoiler alert, 7 years later. Yeah, and I remember, I remember telling my art director, Mike Ahern, a New York legend who Imbal and I came up with, and just worked with him for about a decade on all these small movies. And he was so gracious to come and join me on Motherless Brooklyn. And I had told him, early in the week that I had met on Guardians of the Galaxy, and he was like, Mickle, oh my God. I was like, don't worry, they're never gonna give it to you. It's a quota thing, I'm sure of it. And he and I were going over the Brooklyn Bridge. I'll never forget it. And my agent called, and I was like, oh, and I think I even like literally said like, oh, it's him calling to say I didn't get Guardians of the Galaxy. And I answered, and I remember my agent, I still remember, he's like, how do you feel about coming to LA in 3 months and starting prep on Guardians of the Galaxy? And I was like, I just flipped out in the car. Mike was driving, thank God, going over the car. And he was just cracking up watching me like have a meltdown in the car as I was learning that I was going to get the opportunity to do this movie. And of course I was like, oh, this is, a dream. And I remember I hung up and Mike just looked at me just like we were both just incredulous, just in complete disbelief. And I was so glad to get that call with a dear friend and somebody who had seen me at that point and seen me through my entire career at that point and had worked with, on, I don't know, 8 or 9 films at that point. And so it was really nice to get the call with him to be able to share it with him. And
Yeah,
um,
that's
so
amazing.
yes, and that launched that, and geez, that was 2017, so it's 8 years. That was 8 years ago, and I'm so lucky, man. I've worked with James Gunn almost every year since, or every other year since, on projects almost back to back, and count your lucky stars, man. Just count your lucky
Yeah, that's
stars.
brilliant. Well, just to throw a few stats out there because they are very impressive. Is more scenery than any previous Marvel film, 110 sets over 12 sound stages, one of the sets being 40,000 square feet alone, the largest spaceship in the MCU. And you're quoted as saying, fantasy and sci-fi films best connect with audiences when real physical scenery is used as often as possible. And I agree with that,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on why do you think that is?
I think so. I think it's multifold. First, I think audiences can still detect when surroundings are made in CG. Sure, the background, deep background, everybody can get away with that. But if it's immediate, if it's close to you, I still think, even in the best AI generated images, I still think you can tell like that person is not standing 10 feet from a real piece of scenery. They're clearly in a blue screen. So I think the audience can tell. I think the actors, I think we all should really applaud this whole generation of actors that from like 2000 to 2020, well, not even, probably 2015, was just like working within entirely blue spaces and having to like act with a painted tennis ball and because it takes them out of it too. They just, how can they possibly connect and really, really feel like they're in a world when it's just surrounded in blue? It's just, it's nauseating and kind of mind numbing, to be in those
Absolutely.
scenarios. And so I feel like that bleeds into the film. I feel like it's an uninspiring experience for all the filmmakers, everybody that's on the set. But I really feel like, especially when it's one of these sci-fi kind of action movies, you're interacting with your scenery so much. Things are blowing up, things are falling on you, you're punching through things, you're lifting things up and throwing them. And I think that tactility is really registered by the audience.
Yeah.
And I have to say, man, I'm so lucky to be working with one of the directors who's really, really vocal about this. James is incredibly vocal about it. If it could possibly be done in camera, possibly be done physically, he demands that it's done physically. And I'm so grateful for that because I really, our thoughts, our philosophies really, really align on that. One of the things I'm most proud of actually with Superman, coming out before long is our robot. We designed this robot, along with Legacy Effects, who did this beautiful job building it. And I remember they were running the numbers. We were going to have, I think, at any given point, 6, maybe 8 of these robots moving. And I remember James said, like, we have to build one, like we have to have one physical one on set, and it's got to be there and something for the actor to interact with. But then also, as our visual effects supervisor, Steph Soretti is always saying, and also something for them to scan so that they're not making up any lines, any materiality, any joint movement, like it's right
Right.
there.
Yeah.
They have it. And they did exactly that.
Even the
We
textures, right? All that can be
yeah, all of it, like the
that's
textures, the
amazing.
aging, the way that it moved. This thing was amazing. I'm sure you maybe seen some of the behind the scenes footage. James actually just posted some on Instagram not long ago, but of this, it all worked with it mimicked somebody off screen who had the motion capture suit, and it was like reached out and it would touch somebody's face and come back and then like hold up his hands, and all of those mechanics, visual effects referenced all of that for the way that this one would move. And anyway, I think that it's just a great example of those robots, I think, are wildly successful in the movie. And I think that that is largely because of the decision to build one and then replicate it. So yeah, so bravo to James Gunn for always making sure that that stuff is accounted for and that that stuff ends up in his movies. So.
In terms of approaching a franchise as beloved as Superman, which of course everybody knows from the comic books, but also all the films that have been made over the years, how do you sort of approach reimagining, if you will, or visualizing simply a world that is so kind of ingrained in our shared culture? How do you kind of
Yeah.
approach that with a fresh perspective?
Yeah, it was really interesting starting Superman. We wanted to make sure that we really did honor the original. We were going back to the Richard Donner versions, the 1970s versions. And our movie has a bit of timelessness to it that, if anything, kind of has a little bit of like a 70s, anything 40s through 70s was kind of where we tried to land a lot of our visuals, but overall still being timeless, just like a nice kind of general wash and mix of periods. And so we just wanted to make sure we could honor it a bit by letting some of the 70s bleed through. Um, and so, we watched the original. I went back and I rewatched all of them, and of course, I'd seen most of them before. I hadn't seen some of the recent Supermans, but I had seen all the 1970s version. And just seeing, I remember being totally dazzled by that Fortress of Solitude when I first saw it, when I was a little kid, and thinking like
Yeah,
that was just magic. And oh my God, like what an incredible opportunity and gift to be tasked with reimagining that, and just a dream for me as a production designer to be able to take that on. And I remember thinking, I was I was so excited, but also just horrified that maybe there would be a decision in there that didn't please the audiences that really loved that original, and just how can we do this where hopefully everybody feels like what we did is really honoring the original version, but also making it something fresh and something ours. And of course we didn't want to just do a carbon copy of what they had already done, because everybody's seen that and everybody's familiar with that. And that was 50 years ago. And it definitely felt like there were things that we could improve upon, not improve upon style wise or design wise, but just in terms of materials and things that you could use now for building, and ways that you could rig set pieces to be able to make, interesting shapes and to be able to make, the space more dynamic. Um, and so anyway, that was thinking about those things. That those were the reasons why we decided to kind of take a leap and use the same kind of crystal theme as the original, and the same kind of, the kind of big sprays of the crystals that they did in the original one, but bringing into a shape that was our own. So we felt like, because we were still really embracing a lot of the things that appeared in the first one, but making it our
yeah.
own, that we could hopefully keep audiences really happy, but also give it something that was fresh and new. The Fortress was definitely, that's the one I'm going to be most interested to see how people respond. And they've actually shown a lot of it now in some of the previews. And so it's been fun having the world get to see it. But yeah, you have to walk a fine line. I think the movies that decide to just fully throw away whatever had come before them and not even wink at it, not even glance back, I think that's where you get into tricky territory. But also too, one of the other things I'll say is this actually might surprise some folks. I'm not a big superhero movie. I wasn't a big superhero comic book fan growing up. It was just not something I went to. I was much more into movies. And I and when all the superhero movies really emerged in the last 20 years as being this, big magnet, I was not as drawn to it. It was not a genre that I had was really in love with. So in a way, I think that actually helped. It could help kind of remove me from that
Absolutely.
fervor and that zeitgeist that kind of surrounds the superhero genre. And I think let me see things a bit more objectively. At least when I first started, with these, 8 years ago, I could look at it more objectively and really look and see like, okay, what really does deserve to stay here, and what can we redo? And every now and then I'd have my hand slapped by somebody at Marvel, be like, "No, that's the blah 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 from the blah blah blah." And I'd be like, "Okay, fine, okay, we'll keep it." So of course there are things that my
Uh,
art director's like, "How do you not know what the plan such and such is?" And I sort of looking at my art director and be like, "I've read Jane Austen." Like I was not sitting in bed poring over Batman comic books,
uh, that's great. I think, I think that's a great thing to point out. I think, there is such a thing as perhaps being too close to material sometimes, where it's hard to
Yeah,
even see,
yeah,
a new way forward. Whereas having a little distance from the original material, and also just bringing in your own perspective of the life you've lived, the places you've
yeah.
traveled to, every again,
Visual
going back to our
instincts.
early conversation, all of the things
Mhm.
that, all the bits of inspiration you found all around the world, is what's going to make this film and every film you do distinctly. Obviously it's a collection of all the people who work on it, but it's your vision that we see on the screen that could only come from you, because you are the only person who's
Yeah.
lived the life that Beth Mickle has. And I think
Mhm.
that's what makes your work so, I mean, and everybody's work so exciting. It's to see, this is one person's perspective on the world, of course,
Yeah.
with the collaboration of everybody else who makes a movie. But I think there's something really special about that.
Yeah, absolutely, and everybody's, we all kind of lean in specific directions that are really kind of, that are really kind of unique to us, and I think another one of the other things that's just great with working with James is I think he and I have really similar aesthetics naturally, like, I love, you can see my movies are I really love color. They're really, really vivid. I love, geometry. There's always some, the sharp angles play, some great big sweeping shapes that play. And he really loves that as well. And so I think visually, I think we're really in tune. Whereas if you look at the Superman movies that came just before us, it was I mean, amazing, a beautifully designed. Patrick Tatopoulos had done, I think, all of those. But they were coming from the Zack Snyder universe, which was definitely kind of a heavier, darker aesthetic, which really, really worked for then and for that period. But oh my goodness, you think about now where we are in the world and politically and life and everything and post COVID, like we want to get away from some of the we want to get away from some of the heavy dark times and try to
Mm,
brighten things up a little bit. So hopefully
yeah,
that aesthetic will all kind of serve us well. Hopefully this year.
we'll call it the aesthetic of optimism, right?
Yes, exactly, the aesthetic of optimism.
Yeah, I love looking at some of these retro designs from things like the 1964 World's Fair, and this kind of like
Yeah,
hope for a better tomorrow, and this very optimistic retro futurism thing. I'm always so attracted to
yeah,
that because I think it is rooted in this idea of where are we in the world, and
yeah,
how does the visual aesthetic, nature of the world reflect its moment in history and
completely,
time, right?
completely, and you're absolutely right, like, where do they wanna be heading, back in the 50s and 60s, you could see it in those designs, and everything was, it's explosive and exciting and hopeful and optimistic, and yeah, so I think we could absolutely use a dose of that now, and so it
For
was actually
sure.
really fun being on the movie. We just had that kind of imagery up everywhere. It was hopeful was actually one of our keywords for the movie, so just everywhere you looked, it was really, hopeful visuals kind of surrounded us.
Well, on the topic of optimism, there's something that I think is really outstanding and optimistic, and definitely needs to be part of our conversation today, which is sort of, I guess it's two parts, but how you've sort of structured the workflow of your team, but also something I want to point out with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is that you were able to create a team that was 50% women, which is
Yeah.
somewhat unheard of on films of this scale. if I'm not mistaken, it's usually somewhere around, art departments are often somewhere around like 10 to 15%
That's
women,
correct.
and you've been able
Yeah.
to really push forward to create a really massive positive change in that regard with your 50% woman team. So could you just speak to
Thank
exactly
you.
how you kind of made that a reality?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of when I look back at any of this career is I think some of the art departments that we've been able to shape and the opportunities we've been able to give. A lot of it came from, in the indie world, it was always a mix. It was always men and women on the sets. And I saw that, especially in the New York indie world. And then as the movie started to get into the studio world, as they got above 10 million, I remember going to these tech scouts and being like, where are all the women? Like, why am I the only woman?
Hmm.
And then, getting into anything that was kind of action genre. I mean, all lovely people. And I loved all those experiences and I loved all those collaborators, but I was significantly aware of the fact that pretty much every production meeting, I was the only woman. And there's just there's an awareness to that and just and a desire to want to see more representation in a room. I'm as I think half of the world really is like we believe that the world is a better place where when everybody has a seat at the table, it's not just
Amen. Amen.
right. It's just like why are we trying to not deny people seats at the table for really what are the reasons? People can't even really name the reasons. And but literally sitting at the production table in this big production office, and looking at the big production meeting and being like, "Yep, all men here." And I just remember thinking, all right, if I ever have the chance to have any kind of impact on this, I really want to take that. I really want to take that opportunity and try to make a difference with that. And then getting into so it was always important to me, even on the with the studio movies, when I had done enough of them to be able to hire, more women. I definitely did. That's where I really started bringing in young women who'd recently graduated from college who were looking for a foot in. That was one of the first stepping stones I felt like I could offer. And but then when it got into the superhero world, it was even more so of a gentleman's club. And in fact, I even back up looking at these big tentpole movies going from 2000, 2010, 2015. The vast majority of them were designed by men, and again, all amazing work and all amazing designers, and just nothing but respect for all the great work that they were doing. But it was also, to the women out there in the film industry, it was also very disheartening to feel like, wait, when are we ever going to get a shot to have it, to have that opportunity? um so when I met on Guardians, I just remember thinking like, they're they're just gonna hire, one of the guys they've worked with over and over. And then when they didn't, and I really, really credit James Gunn with that, like he really could have just handpicked from the usual suspects, and that's how the door never opens for somebody else to get that opportunity. But he didn't. He was really aware of, no, I want somebody fresh and I want somebody new and to this. And he wanted to have just more diversity on the set. Why not? So when I got that opportunity with Guardians, and that was actually back, 2017, the first kind of iteration of it. I just remember talking to the art directors, to the supervising art director involved, and just said it was really important to me, that we had women employed. And I remember that person asked like, "Oh, why?" And I just said, I can't be one of the first women to do a superhero movie and to not make sure that there is more balance in my department. Like that won't sit well with me. That's
Yeah.
not how change happens. Um, and I remember a list was given to me at some point of like, here's the art directors and set designers that we could hire for this movie. It's 2017, and we're looking at the list, and it was 16 names on it. And there was one woman and 15 men. And I remember going back and being like, okay, great. I know all their credits are all amazing, but we need to add more women onto this list. And at first I remember in one iteration of the movie, this is before we ended up going down and then coming back up in 2021 and making the movie. But um, I just remember some skepticism over going this route, and I just said, it's a non-negotiable for me. And then I was so lucky when the movie resurrected. We had Dave Scott and Alan Hook, were the supervising art directors, and I'd worked with both of them at that point. And both of them, they both have daughters. they both agree. They both feel the same way I do. And there was just no hesitation. The list of candidates that we got, it was always an equal mix, men and women. And we were aware that some of the women hadn't, they've been assistant art director, but they hadn't been an art director. It was like, all right, let's give them a shot. They've been a set designer, but not an assistant art director. Let's give them a shot. So and so with my PA, we can get her into the union, make her a graphic designer. Let's do it. Like, let's just create opportunities here because
Opening
we have
doors, absolutely.
opening doors. And you know what? Every single person, every single woman that we've done that for, has absolutely flourished. And they've all become, really fixtures now in our film, or in our film family there.
Yeah,
And none of this is to say that we don't hire men. That's not the
of
goal.
course
The
not.
goal is to have half and half. And
Absolutely.
so yeah, so I was really proud on Guardians. It was half women across the board, and then on Superman it was half women all across the board. And also really proud. I was just looking the other day at a shot that we took of the art department members standing on the Fortress of Solitude, and our stills photographer took it, and you looked across the faces, and it was, men and women, and it was skin colors of all ranges, and it was everybody was accounted for. And that just kind of naturally happened because we were just trying to make sure people had opportunities. Um, and it was, anyway, I was really proud of that. I was looking, I was like, this is exactly what this is what this should look like,
Mm.
and I'm just
Well,
really proud that we did that.
absolutely. And not just what the film industry should look like, but what the world should look like, right? So
Yes.
the fact that you all
Yeah.
were able to kind of create your own little perfect world, I think is really
Yeah.
inspiring. And
Yeah.
and two, I also want to mention, I met you in 2022 at the first Production Designers Gathering in Greece. And what I
Mm.
found so inspiring about both of the production designers gatherings that have happened is actually the amount of women that are there, and to see
Yeah.
it's kind of like a glimpse into the future of the industry, of finding a
Mhm.
place where there is room for everybody at the table,
Mhm.
250 people from 36 different countries spending a week
Yeah.
together in Greece. It's a really magnificent thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the reason I bring that up is in 2022, there was a panel that had to do with well-being at work, and you spoke about particular way that you've also kind of restructured the work week,
Mhm.
especially on Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'm wondering if you might reflect on that for a moment as well.
Yeah, I feel like we all at some point realize that we've, in a way, just become a slave to these hours and to these productions, and we love it so much. That's the tricky thing. You're doing these indies, and you're just working around the clock, and you love it, and you just devour it. And Ball and I would do 18-hour days on sets, and just like can't wait to come back the next morning. But you can't do that, forever. You run out of steam. And we had both Emil and I had worked with designers that and saw designers that really burn out at the age of, the age of 30, age of 35. And so I just remember thinking early on, like, okay, I'm a hard worker. I can do this. I'm a basketball player. I could just go to the last minute. Um, but I also don't want to sacrifice all of my life and my energy and my well-being, for any profession, whatever that profession might be. And so I just remember thinking back in my 20s, like, okay, when I get far enough in my career that it's stable, I wanted to just reclaim some of the things that I think make reclaim some of the things that help you find a life work balance, where it's not all about the job, where you can recharge your battery. Um, you can be fresh to come back in the next day. Um, and I think one of the things I think sometimes folks aren't necessarily treated all that well in the film world. There were times where people were mistreated, and people were spoken to in ways that they shouldn't be spoken to. I genuinely think a lot of that has to come from like people just being so like worked into the ground and not being able to go and just take a moment and take a walk
Mm,
and do some yoga, catch your breath, see your
absolutely.
family, spend the weekend with your family. Don't spend it tied to your phone. And so I just thought, okay, I just wanted to make sure that I carved out time for myself to do that. And so I started doing that about 10 years ago. And where I would just and anybody that knows me or hears me talk about my routines, I always take a walk. I always take a walk in the morning. If for any reason I can't, then I'll take a walk in the afternoon at lunch. I just always try to get out and just catch air. Don't have anything going on. Just go and just kind of have a meditative moment. And I can always tell the days that I don't do that when I'm working. I can always tell the days. It's the days that I feel just a little bit more on edge toward the end of the day. And it's like clockwork, you know. And so anyway, I saw that about myself. When I started reclaiming my weekends, my following weeks were so much more productive. And I felt like I just genuinely did better work. You know, my
Yeah.
ideas were fresher, you know, the work came more easily. I had stamina. Um, and so anyway, that was about 10 years ago I started doing that. Then 4 or 5 years ago, I thought like, okay, this should trickle down to everybody else that's working with us. You know, everybody else. Like this shouldn't just be reserved for department heads. You know, I see DPs that come in at 10 a.m. and leave at 3 p.m. It's like this shouldn't just be reserved for the department heads. Everybody should be able to have these are just basic human necessities, you know.
Yeah.
And at that point I was working with a lot of people that had kids and families and wanted to get home for dinner, and I was just like, what are we doing? Why are we tying ourselves to these desks from, you know, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or, you know, sometimes 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's great, but diminishing returns, guys. We're only offering so
Absolutely.
much. And, you know, and everybody's going to be happier if they just start to have some of their quality of life back. And so the art director I was working with at the time, Dave Scott, he and I both decided, like, okay, we're going to, and that was actually on Megalopolis on Francis Ford Coppola movie. We really kind of implemented it there and just said, okay, we're gonna let everybody have more humane hours. And if you're a morning person, you know, come in early and come in as early as you want, but then, you know, get home in time for proper dinner. If you're not a morning person, if you're a night owl, like, you know, it's okay if you slide those hours a little bit. Um, and then lunchtime, I'm a big advocate of like go and get out, get away from your desk for lunch, go for a walk, go to the gym across the street, go run a mile, just do something just to kind of get away and get your body moving and recharge. And I even tried to get everybody to do a yoga class every Tuesday together across the street. I mean, like yoga studio. That didn't last, but that's my goal in the next one. I was like, we could do team yoga. We could do like my art director and I would go and look around and nobody else would be there. I'd be like, okay, next week. And it's just like but I was like, next time, we're gonna do it next time. Um, and honestly, every single person that was part of those shifts, everybody just came up and said, what a difference this makes. Like, you know, I actually have time with my family. I can walk my daughter to school. You know, I can have dinner with my family. I can, you know, I have my weekends back. I'm not stressed. And so anyway, I am a very big advocate for that. And I think that, you know, I think we've all been in those offices where you're working 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and you can look around, you can see there's a lot of time that like there isn't forward movement or,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's kind of, you know, you hit a wall and like, let's just take out those hours where we're not productive when we're hitting a wall and like give them back to being time with our families and time looking after ourselves. I mean, 10 hours of work a day that's a long day. Like
It
Europeans look
is.
at us and think we're nuts, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, and the other thing too is then knowing there will be moments where it's all hands on deck and maybe you got to stay a little later or you got to work the weekend, but having that balance, you know, when you can, I think makes those moments so much easier to kind of handle and right?
Completely, because you have the reserve, you know, left
You
in your
have the
battery that
reserve.
you could
Yeah.
do that, you know? If you've been slugging it for the last 6 months, just working around the clock, then you have to push to get a set done and nobody has any energy left in the tank. It's like that's, you know, you're only hurting yourself there, you know? And I feel like all the folks that are working with you then also recognize that like that you value them as humans as well and as family members and you know and they feel respected and they all want to work, you know, that much harder to make the time count that they are there. And genuinely I really feel like everybody's work improved as well when we started doing that. Like everybody like because people just had again people were arrested and people didn't feel like they were sacrificing family time and all that and I really feel and spirits are just always up and I just feel like that all comes across in the work and all impacts the work that people are putting out and offering as well. So it's just like for me it's like a win-win across the board. And of course if somebody's taking advantage of it then maybe you don't invite them back on the next one, but we've never had anybody take advantage of it.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah,
I think some of the times when I talk about it, I think I definitely feel like there's some designers out there who are like, "You're crazy." Like, what are you talking
no,
about? Like,
it's
we just work and work and work. And so, yeah.
I think it's really inspiring, and you've shifted the dial, which I don't think is necessarily an
Thank
easy thing
you.
to do, you know? And
Thank
I know
you.
it's in some ways it seems so obvious, the idea of work-life balance,
Yeah.
but it is so often neglected. And I think, it's our job to tell stories that hopefully shed some light on what it means to be human. I'd say pretty
Yeah.
much every movie comes back to this idea of, emotions that we can all relate to, experiences that we can all relate to in one way or another. And if there's
Mhm.
not time to be out in the world and actually taking that in, then how
Yeah.
on earth is anybody supposed to do their job when they're in these
Yeah.
windowless boxes for
Yes.
very long periods of time, closed off to the world, And so I
Yes.
think it seems counterproductive to not have that time between projects or even during projects to live your life and let that find its way into the room.
Yeah. Absolutely. What a good way to say it. Exactly. And that's what we're supposed to be doing and producing and offering to these projects. And it's like you have to open up those channels so that people are able to actually offer those things.
Yeah,
I
I
hope, and
think.
thank you for saying that about the dial. That's honestly, it's been my biggest hope with all of this. And with speaking at the Production Designers Collective, and we're going to announce this the well-being initiative. I know it's already been out in a few newsletters, but we're really trying to help find ways to reach out to the community and offer pathways for people to be able to implement some of these things into their practices and work, and into finding people to talk to, and all these things that just kind of help keep us balanced as humans, and make this whole thing we call the great human experience the best one that we can.
I love that. Well, I think it also naturally leads into my closing question for today, which is, and hopefully this doesn't feel too redundant based on the past few
Mm.
minutes we've been talking, but what is your hope for the future of the industry?
Oh, what a great question. I Wow, it's a really interesting time to be asking that with the advent of AI and everything that we are seeing. I I really hope, and I think that this is very plausible. My brother and I have spoken about this, and he agrees as well. We really feel like um, the industry is going to open up to people that it hasn't been available to thus far. People that couldn't afford to make movies. I think AI is going to help with some of that. So I think that we're going to start to see films being made in creative ways using some AI tools, but also at the same time, uh, people and audiences really wanting to see real humans and handcrafted things and real experiences. And we also feel like that will also continue. Real physical production will also continue. And these things can both exist at the same time. I think that we can. I think that we can still have traditional movie making and people that are always going to love that and always respond to that. But I also think that because the work is going to shift so much in these coming years with technology, I think that it's also going to shift the way that we approach filmmaking. And I think that we have an opportunity to make that happen in a way that's better and healthier and happier for all of us. I think that some of the practices that people are used to for so many decades, I think there's going to be, a time and a recognition that we can leave those in the past and
Hmm.
find these new ways of making things. And I think despite what's going on in the world, despite what's going on in the country, I really believe that our industry is one that's still values and will always value, diversity and inclusion, and really telling. That's what we are. We're telling everybody's stories. Um, and so I think that the sets that are going to be physical and practical and people shooting on, I think that regardless again of what's going on in the world, I think ours will always look um, happy and healthy and diverse. But then my biggest hope too, beyond all of that, is that we find ways of doing it where everybody feels like they're balancing, putting all their love and creativity into their jobs, and also all their love and creativity into their families and their personal lives as well. So I think it's going to look radically different in 10 years, but I think different for the better is my hope.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for the generosity of your time today.
Yeah.
Your work and your way of working is really inspiring, and I'm so grateful to have had you on the show today. So thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank you for having me. What a joy. What a joy to talk with you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation today. I'd like to take a moment to recognize my co-producer, Gavin Mosier, and the composer of our original score, Nathan Avakian. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for our next conversation in this ongoing odyssey into the world of film design. Until next time, be kind, stay creative, and thanks for listening.